The trusts question from February 2010 is a conventional, straightforward fact pattern. You're not going to see any issues in this question that aren't available in a number of other questions. Have a look at the call. 1. At Hank's death, what claims, if any, do the trust beneficiaries have against Trustee? Discuss. We know these beneficiaries are going to have one or more theories of liability and one or more prayers for relief. But the most common theory of liability that beneficiaries have against trustees is breach of duty, typically the breach of the reasonable care duty or breaches of the duty of loyalty. Next, in call of the question number 2, we are asked, how should the trust assets be distributed? Discuss. Answer according to California law. Here again, there's nothing new. We will organize this part of our analysis either around the assets or the beneficiaries. Glancing just one line above the call of the question, we see these 5 potential claimants: Wendy, Mom, Aaron, Beth, and Carl, and we might organize call of the question number 2 around these individuals, or around property. But in the end, we will provide a straight answer that indicates who gets what. Now, turn to the top of the question, and we see a short, straightforward, and fairly complicated set of facts. In paragraph 1, we meet the settlor and 3 of the 5 claimants, Wendy, Aaron, and Beth. Notice that the first sentence gives us a marriage, Hank and Wendy, and they divorce. But this is not really a community property question at all. It's really a pure trust question. In paragraph 2, we find Hank creating this valid, revocable trust. So we're not going to have to worry a great deal about talking about the trust itself, although we're not going to be able to escape discussing it all together. Notice the details. This fully revocable trust orders the trustee to pay income to Hank during Hank's life, and then, upon Hank's death, the trust ends, and trustee is supposed to distribute whatever assets are left, as indicated. 1/2 to the mother, if she's still alive, and the remainder to Aaron and Beth, Hank's kids. Now, in paragraph 3, we see the trustee's actions. Basically, the trustee just invests all the assets of the trust in commercial real estate, which yields a lot of income. Why is that probably not a breach of the duty to these residuary beneficiaries? Answer: because the trust is revocable and we've got an income beneficiary who also is the settlor. So what's the matter with the trustee maximizing income to this life beneficiary who's also the settlor? Answer: I don't see anything wrong with it at all. But you can certainly understand how the beneficiaries might feel very differently about that issue. Take a look at the next paragraph. Here we meet Carl, a son of Hank's, whom Hank did not know. So we have to deal with the possibility that this claimant, Carl, will have an interest in his intestate share. And in fact, that's what I conclude. Then we get the list of potential claimants again and the cause of the question. As we intuited from the start, there's nothing really very complicated going on here in the end. Take a look at how I have chosen to organize a good, careful answer to this question. Notice that even though we are told about this trust being valid, I still think we need to go into it in a fair amount of depth. But that doesn't require a huge amount of work. I break it down into the elements of validity: intent, corpus, beneficiaries, and purpose. And when you turn to my answer, you'll see I don't have a great deal to say about any one of these. Still, to do a genuinely thorough analysis of the litigation between the beneficiaries and the trustee, I think that carefully establishing the line item details of the trust is very much in our interest. Now, the beneficiaries are going to have a theory of liability, and really the only possible theory they've got is a breach of the duty of care. In this question, a little bit more specifically, the duty to diversify. Now, as you know, I'm concluding in favor of the trustee. I just don't think the trustee did anything wrong here. However, it does seem to me that the facts would justify a reasonable alternate conclusion. In other words, I think it wouldn't be crazy for a bar candidate to write an answer that finds the trustee liable for breaching the duty to diversify. Now, I don't really think that's a very good conclusion, because I think the fact that the trust was fully revocable and the fact that the settlor also was the income beneficiary make the trustee's actions entirely legitimate. However, if you don't choose to agree with that, I think you could be pretty safe in understanding that you'll still get a passing score to this question, assuming you do the analysis in a reasonable amount of depth. So, even if you're going to conclude in favor of the beneficiaries, I think you really need to go into the trustee's defenses in a reasonable amount of depth. Now, I have a couple of different things to say there. First, I talk about how the trustee maximized income to a living settlor beneficiary, and then I suggest that the trustee exercises reasonable business judgment in any event, because these assets still are going to generate substantial income, and it's likely that they will recover their value over time. So, as I say, if you don't agree with me and you think the trustee ought to be liable, I think you should consider the defenses explicitly even then. Now, I do think that the conclusion I arrive at, that the beneficiaries don't have a claim against the trustee, probably is the better conclusion. But as I say, what counts is the breadth and depth of your analysis. Notice that my answer to the first call of the question discusses the trust in some detail, the breaches, the defenses, and then arrives at a conclusion. You don't necessarily have to agree with my conclusion, but I think you can see that it is pretty hard to argue with the validity of the structure of my analysis. Now, turn to my outline of Part 2, and you'll see that with regard to distribution of assets, I focus first on the terms of the trust, and then we have to get into Carl. It seems to me that Carl's claim as an omitted child is going to succeed. He's got an intestate share. So I conclude Wendy gets nothing, Carl gets his intestate share, Mom gets $100,000, and Aaron and Beth get $50,000 each. Now, again, if you think that the trustee is going to end up being liable, those numbers would be adjusted. But you wouldn't be able to adjust them very specifically because we don't get specific numbers about how much the property value declined during the time that the trustee was making these decisions. Now, for a minute or two, have a look with me at the model answer that I provide, and notice that right up front, I lead with the facts. I indicate that Hank's mother and his children, Aaron and Beth, were named beneficiaries, because they were. These are the trust beneficiaries who have the right to pursue remedies from the trustee. Now, right up front, I indicate that the trustee ought to win, but it would be entirely okay to either leave that out altogether or reach the opposite conclusion. I focus on the trust, and again, right up front, I indicate what I know from the facts, which is that the trust is valid. Still, in order to figure out what the trustee's potential liability is, we need to see whether or not the terms of the trust give us any insight. And it seems evident that they do, because the trust was set up a year after Hank's marriage dissolved. And it seems evident that he's trying to provide for himself for the rest of his life and then leave a comfortable nest egg for his heirs. And so we follow the analysis and we arrive at a conclusion with regard to the trust, that it's a valid trust set up by the settlor to benefit himself during the rest of his life, and then to benefit his mom, if she is still around, and his kids after he's gone. Next, we focus on the trustee's alleged breaches. And notice, again, I lead with the factual context and the law that will allow us to reach a conclusion in this case. I focus up front on the duty of care, and then in some depth I go into the duty to diversify. Because with regard to the duty of care, it seems evident that during Hank's life, trustee was doing what Hank wanted him to do, which is maximize income to Hank so that he can have a comfortable retirement, and then have a substantial nest egg for his heirs. And as I look at the duty to diversify, this is one respect in which I think reasonable people can differ, because we do have a trustee putting all of the trust assets into essentially one item. Even if the commercial real estate involved more than one parcel, it's still one type of asset class. And the beneficiaries have a very reasonable argument that this constitutes a breach of the duty of care, this failure to diversify. Now, notice in Part C, I focus on the trustee's defenses. The trustee maximized income to Hank during Hank's life. And also, trustee's business judgment would be judged reasonable in any event. So, I conclude the beneficiaries have no claim against the trustee. We turn to distribution, and to my way of thinking, this is not a terribly complicated part of the question. I focus on the terms of Hank's trust, which gives us the basic formula for distribution, regardless of whether or not we decide that Carl has an interest. If Carl does have an interest, whatever is left after Carl is paid will be divided according to this same formula. So, again, I get into the fact about the existence of Carl, and then in Part 2b, I focus on Carl's claim. Now, although the beneficiaries in Question 1 aren't going to get anything, Carl's claim is valid, and he is going to be able to get his intestate share. Hank died, survived by 3 children, and California intestacy law would divide Hank's estate equally among the kids. 1/3 of $300,000 gives Carl $100,000. So, I am able to figure out Carl's intestate share easily. There's a little arithmetic to do in this problem, but it isn't hard to figure out. Now, we arrive at a conclusion. Wendy doesn't have any claim against Hank's estate. This is as close as we get to a community property crossover issue. Wendy failed to claim child support during Hank's life, and as a result, that claim is waived at the time of Hank's death. So, Wendy gets nothing, Carl gets $100,000, and so that leaves us with $200,000. Applying the basic formula that was set forth in the trust, Mom gets $100,000, and Aaron and Beth split the other $100,000. They get $50,000 apiece. And so, in the end, we see no new issues presented here, and the analysis is pretty easy to do so long as we organize our thinking carefully in advance.